Matt Priest here with FDRA and another version of Kicks Over Coffee. I'm here not with real coffee, actually. We're going to be fast and loose with those rules. This is water because it's like 100 degrees in DC, but I am joined by our chief economist, Gary Rains, live via satellite in North Carolina. He's got a cup of coffee. And Gary, we're glad that you're here because we're going to talk about footwear sourcing. It's that time of year. It's time to release the annual footwear sourcing report that FDRA has done for many years now. But we're going to do some things differently this year. We're not going to do kind of the PDF report that, Gary, you've helped pull together over the last few years and distribute that out. We're going to do an interactive website. Chances are you're watching this video, you're already on the website. We've just launched it. And so we're really excited about it. Gary, what are some of the other things that are different about this iteration versus past year versions?
Sure. Certainly, I appreciate the opportunity to come speak with you again today. The big change this year with the interactive web-based version is just that interactivity as opposed to maybe the static PDF version from previous editions. In this one, as opposed to just being a graph on a page, one can mouse around and click on it and see individual numbers from one year to the next, and it really gives a whole new level of interactivity as opposed to just the static graph on a page or data on a page seen in the PDFs in previous years.
Yeah, so I'm really excited about it because I think it's a new way of us presenting the data. This is really important data, particularly this year with all that's going on the trade side as it relates to the politics of trade that we've been covering every single day. It's dominated my life for a long time now. But be that as it may, people want to keep up with the trends. And we do put out the trends every month. So people have access to that on an ongoing basis. But in addition, people are also reaching out to us, for specific requests, which we're happy to accommodate because Gary has his fingers on, not on the button, but on the stats that are so necessary to understand how imports are trending for U.S. footwear. So that's important for us, and so people need to be aware of that. Gary, let's go through kind of the narrative that's been out there for quite some time. I feel like for the last 8 or 9 years, I've been saying very similar things as it relates to footwear trade. China is our largest supplier, check. China's shedding market share, check. Vietnam's gathering up that market share from China, check. Indonesia's number 3. So 95% of all of our supply comes from those 3 countries. Everyone else is fighting it out in the margins. And those trend lines will continue. China's got a labor issue. They've got higher wages. They are not as interested in making footwear as they have been in years past. Vietnam's really hungry. We had this thing called the Trans-Pacific Partnership that was driving, I think, demand for Vietnam. Tell me what narratives are out there in 2019. Are some of these still relevant, or are we seeing some changes across the horizon?
Certainly. Those issues are certainly still key, that we're seeing that China remains by far the 800-pound gorilla in the industry, supplying some 2/3 of the volume of U.S. footwear imports. But within that, China's maybe we're seeing China's share erode largely because of increased Vietnamese penetration over the last several years. And of course, Indonesia has seen their volume increase modestly compared to what we've seen in Vietnam. Beyond those macro issues, we've certainly seen some interesting trends going on with second-tier suppliers. We saw an impressive surge and then collapse in shipments from Mexico earlier this year. We've seen impressive growth going on this year in shipments from Myanmar, and of course, Cambodia has been a growing factor here the last couple of years. Beyond those, we're also watching issues like suppliers you wouldn't necessarily expect to see, like an Italy and a Germany had increased impressively here the last several months.
Interesting.
Now, again, that pales in comparison to a China or a Vietnam, but it's certainly something worth watching as well.
Sprechen Sie Deutsch there, Gary? Do you speak German?
No, very little.
I don't either. All right. So every good economist, behind every good economist, there's data of some sort that he or she is manipulating to our favor, usually. So Gary's no different. And so I would love to kind of dive into some of the numbers, Gary. And I know you've got a number of charts you want to kind of unveil to us. And so why don't you throw those up and we will make our way through the data, and you can provide you'll be the play-by-play guy and I'll be the color commentary jokester, and we'll go through this and see how it all plays out.
Okay, certainly. Happy to do so. Starting again from a 50,000 foot level, looking at the total value of U.S. footwear imports on an annual basis. Here's a graph over the last 22 years or so showing that this year we expect to see imports increase pretty close to a record level, somewhere north of $28 billion. That's up maybe 3.5% year over year. Within this number, when we look at that diversification, this is exactly the point you were mentioning earlier, how we've seen, while China remains the 800-pound gorilla, we've seen that Chinese share has really eroded over the last several years. On a dollar basis, it's going to be maybe half of U.S. footwear imports. On a volume basis, it's about 2/3. And again,
what's interesting about that chart, though, Gary, to stop you, is not everyone's sourcing profile is the same. So this is really valuable because you can see where the dollars are being spent and the kind of value of the type of product coming in. But when you look specifically at what China produces versus what Vietnam produces, Vietnam's overall average price is much higher than China's. They do far more the branded athletic side and other types of American brands that we know and love. China serves more of the kind of mass retail market, more on the private label value type of footwear that working families buy. And so not all things are equal when you look at those numbers. Am I getting that right?
Absolutely. And again, this is still a very broad brushstroke, the 50,000 foot level. If we were to really drill down within particular types of footwear, then yeah, you'd exactly see what you're talking about. Big differences between China and Vietnam on shares and unit costs when you get down to your particular markets, say athletic or men's versus women's. It would look very different than this overall aggregate figure.
Got it.
So as we've seen this Chinese share erode, we've seen that's largely been picked up by Vietnam. Yes, the rest of the world also has expanded, but it's really been a fairly modest increase in share from the rest of the world other than Vietnam and China. It is largely, again, over the last 10 years, it's mostly been a two-country story, the erosion in China and the pickup in that erosion by Vietnam.
Yeah.
Digging a little further, when we look at the change in shipments from 2017 to 2018, clearly it is far and away a Vietnamese story. That the Vietnamese volume from 2017 to 2018 had increased somewhere north of about 56 million pairs, and you can see how that just really dwarfs the changes in shipments from really the rest of the world combined. So it was far and away a Vietnamese story last year.
Yeah, what's really interesting as you think about Vietnam, we continue to think about the Vietnam opportunity, is that the population is just not there to take on all of the product that China will probably intend to shed, either because they're wanting to shed it or because of trade policy impacting the demand on Chinese product. And so they're forced to shed that production. And there's about 1 billion pairs that would have to be moved out of China. And, a place like Vietnam cannot take that on. And our analysis, the capacity, although we've been hearing for 8 or 9 years there's not enough capacity in Vietnam, they still find it. We can tell you anecdotally, we're hearing price spikes of 15, 18% because demand is surging. And there's just not enough places to go in Vietnam to account for all that China intends to shed over the coming years.
Absolutely. In fact, in the monthly import analysis that we publish every month to FDRA.org, we often do a chart of the month, where we look at interesting issues both for total footwear, athletic footwear, bootwear, children's footwear, that sort of thing. And we do a chart of the month for each one of these markets. And we had done one just maybe 2 or 3 months ago, looking at that very issue, kind of comparing how much the average landed cost of footwear from Vietnam has increased compared to the world average. And it's really impressive to see that even though we've seen such growth in Vietnamese shipments, they've done so not only at higher unit costs than the rest of the world, but at rising unit costs relative to the rest of the world.
Got it. Interesting.
Yeah. So, talking about that very issue, a moment ago, I'd shown total footwear imports. Here's a look at the dollar value of footwear just from Vietnam, and we've seen how, my goodness, for 16 years now, Vietnamese shipments have grown consistently year over year, and now it's estimated to in 2019 to be pretty close to about $7 billion worth coming in from the second largest supplier. Looking at a breakdown of the shipments from Vietnam, broken out by 4-digit HS number, we see really that it's largely been dominated by 6401 and 6404 have been the big beneficiaries for, maybe a dozen years or so now.
Yeah, textile, plastic shoes, athletic shoes. That's where we're seeing that.
Yeah, exactly. 6404 is uppers made of textile materials. Exactly.
Wait, go back to that real quick. 6403. I don't even see that tracking anywhere. Is that anywhere?
Actually, I'm sorry. I said 6401. I believe
6403
is the darker line. Yeah,
that is leather footwear, and that's there's been an interest in migrating into Vietnam to produce more and more leather footwear, and it seems like that is gaining some steam.
Yeah. Looking beyond imports for a moment to look at retail prices. Of course, we also do a good bit of analysis of what happens further downstream. And really the big issue in 2019, not only in June, but also in year-to-date 2019, has been while total footwear prices are roughly flat year over year, the big reason has been because of declines in women's footwear prices. Mm-hmm. So even though men's and boys and girls are seeing year-over-year increases, women's prices are causing total footwear prices to be roughly flat. This is the case both June 2018 to June 2019. It's also the case year-to-date 2018 versus 2019 that lower prices for women's footwear is really weighing on total footwear prices and completely offsetting increases in both men's footwear prices and children's footwear prices.
I don't know. We're in the back-to-school time, or it's coming up very quickly, which is one of the big selling seasons of our year as an industry, and if prices are going up on boys and girls shoes, then that may impact demand, and little Johnny is not going to get the kick from dad. And so hopefully that's not the case, but that's something to keep an eye on.
Well, in fact, 2 points to that. We watch the changes in prices both on a seasonally adjusted basis and on a non-seasonally adjusted basis. So that way issues like, say, back to school, we were able to kind of take into account price changes both seasonally adjusted and non-seasonally adjusted. And this is the case we've seen with year-to-date prices, that they're higher for boys and girls, at least over the first half of the year versus the same first half of the year, 2018. The other point, exactly as you mentioned with the decline in demand on the supply side, and I'll show this graph in just a few moments, we've seen a substantial erosion in the volume of U.S. Imports of children's footwear. If I were to skip ahead a moment here, it's exactly the issue going on here, that children's footwear imports are estimated in 2019 to fall substantially to the lowest level in about 12 or 13 years. Interestingly, this is at the same time that we're expect to see the average landed cost of children's footwear imports increase markedly from 2018 to record high in 2019.
Yeah, I mean, is that a warning sign for the overall economy? Is that something that we need to be concerned about as it relates to pricing and demand?
We watch this closely again for different market segments, and we really haven't seen this in any other segment. Again, looking at total, men's, women's, athletic, bootwear, it really hasn't been near as pronounced issue as what we're seeing in children's footwear. In fact, as I said a few moments ago, we expect to see a record volume of total footwear imports into the U.S. in 2019, in spite of a pretty substantial decline in the shipments of children's footwear.
Is that a Payless bankruptcy issue?
I don't think so. I had wondered about that, and we've seen this for each of the last 6 months, substantial year-over-year double-digit declines for each of the last 6 months. And I don't think it is just a repercussion of the Payless bankruptcy. And again, this is a supply-side issue. One would think that if they're not buying at Payless, consumers would go elsewhere. Demand would remain as robust in spite of that particular retailer filing the bankruptcy, that they would go elsewhere and the volumes would still be, comparable to what we'd seen in the past. But that really hasn't been the case at all. And it's certainly something that we keep a close eye on every month to see if this children's footwear issue is likely to have legs, pardon the pun, going forward, well into 2019.
What else you got for us, Gary?
Sure. I talked about children's wear. If I look at boot wear, it's a similar issue to what I'd seen, shown earlier for total footwear. That while China is still by far the largest supplier, accounting for pretty close to half the volume of bootwear imports, that volume is down substantially from 8 or 9 years ago. And again, it's largely because of Vietnam picking up that lost share. Similar to children's wear and boot wear, if we look at athletic, same thing again. I'm showing that the Chinese volume has eroded sharply, and that it has largely been a one-to-one switch from China to Vietnam, just for athletic footwear imports on a dollar basis for 12 or 13 years now.
Yeah, and I suspect if you were to bifurcate out certain higher end athletic, so you were able to capture the Nikes and the Adis of the world, that those numbers would look even more orange earlier on. But with the movement of athletic into Vietnam and establishing such a, pardon my pun, such a foothold there, then you're looking, if you're adding in kind of the generic aspect, that is starting to fall in there. And so even athletic shoes that are, that are private label and a Target or a Walmart or wherever might actually be sourced out of Vietnam there as well. So you might pick up some of that too.
Yeah. And these slides really I've focused primarily on the China to Vietnam story, and that has been really the main driver for 10 years or so now. Yeah. But certainly there are a wealth of other issues going on. I'd mentioned earlier Mexico and Burma, Myanmar, and Cambodia, and even Germany and Italy, Ethiopia, and we watch a range of issues going on, both volumes, dollar values, and unit costs, as well as duties in these other countries as well. And certainly that's something that we're always ready, willing, and able to help share with members. If they have a particular question or want to take a deeper dive into sourcing, considering sourcing from one country versus another, we're always eager to help with that.
Yeah, absolutely. What else? Anything else that people need to be aware of that's hanging out there?
Oh my goodness. Well, we'd probably have to settle for the 4-hour webinar for that one. There's always plenty more to cover. But certainly I would encourage folks to take a look at the newest sourcing report, and of course let us know any feedback you have on how we can maybe tailor that further for issues down the road to help it be a better fit and be more insightful, and another tool in the tool chest to help produce and distribute and sell footwear more effectively, efficiently, and profitably.
Yeah. So if you kind of pull these charts off and we close this out, Gary, I think that in this current environment, as we're kind of working, why don't you take the charts off the screen as we close this out? In this current environment, as we're working through the trade impact and what we're seeing with China and what we're seeing with the potential for additional tariffs, I'll be really interested to see what the numbers look like 6 months from now. Even though we're in the middle of what we kind of think is a reprieve that could go away instantly at any moment, we are also in an environment where our members are really dramatically and quickly looking for ways out of China. And as our chairman, Mike Jepson, has said, the threat of tariffs is almost as effective as actual implementation of tariffs. And so I think that over the next 6 months, it'll be really interesting to see what this data looks like and how much of those trend lines go into hyper speed and how much China loses market share. China, their economy is not doing well at all. I think it's last report I saw, it's the worst it's been in 27 years. So these tariffs are having an impact, and that is what it basically is designed to be, tariffs on Americans that alter where people source from, because it will change American demand because of higher prices because of the additional tariffs. And so that is having a dramatic impact on the Chinese economy, and we don't know where the end game is. So we'll have to kind of figure that out as we move ahead. But I have to imagine the data will look quite a bit different in 6 months.
Yeah, I would believe so. And beyond the political issue, we of course also keep a close eye on issues like exchange rates. How we're seeing that the exchange rate in one country versus the U.S. dollar is likely to impact trade for footwear or for broader trade coming in from that country. So a range of different issues. So certainly we're always eager to to help members further in a wide range of different ways to as they say, to skin the cat.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Gary, thanks for joining me with this Kicks and Coffee. This is my first one. Andy's done a number. Jasmine's done some. We navigated through it like tech savvy guys we aren't, and I appreciate you sharing these insights. And we encourage folks to go to FDRA.org to access all of our kind of information. If you're a member in the Intel Center, you can get all the import reports every month, as well as this most recent 2019 sourcing assessment. Gary, thanks as always for your expertise and your time, and look forward to catching up with you later.
Absolutely. Thank you.